Hi, this is Michael Leahy of the Irish Freedom Party, talking to you on what appears to be the day of freedom. It appears to be the day that we have finally brought an end to this miserable lockdown that has blighted the lives of so many people over the last 2 years. And I'm certainly not going to be a curmudgeon. I think it's wonderful. I think it's great that it's happening. And perhaps now we can get back to normal politics. Perhaps we can talk about some of the things that we haven't been able to talk about properly for the last 2 years, such as housing. Why is it that young people in this country find it impossible to acquire housing? Freedom of speech, the number of parties in our Dáil who seem intent on attacking the right of ordinary people to freely express their opinions. Inflation and how that is going to kick in, how that's going to affect us, and how it's going to affect incomes, and of course carbon tax, the rash of carbon taxes which we will face over the next years, and the kind of negative impact that that is going to have, particularly on rural Ireland. However, before we do all that, I think it is appropriate that we should assess what has happened in the last 2 years. As long ago as April of 2020, I think one of the very first videos I made in this series, I called for a roadmap to get us out of the lockdown, which had been in operation then for approximately 3 weeks. And you will, of course, remember that at the initial phases, it was said that we would have a lockdown for 3 weeks to flatten the curve. And that 3 weeks has grown into a dreadful period of 2 years, a sad, sad period in our history and in our social history. Think of the things that we have lost, the Christmases, the meetings with our elderly people, the elderly people who have been forced to die alone, in fear and misery, and for, in my opinion, no good reason. This has been a seminal moment for us as a democracy and as a free republic. And it is very important that we not forget what happened, because if we forget what happened, it's going to happen again. And we can't let that happen. We've witnessed an attack against our constitution of a quite extraordinary fashion, which has been carried out not just by our political parties and our government, but by our professions, our media, our churches, our courts, our civil society. And that's a dreadful situation. There can be no doubt about this. Our most basic freedoms have been attacked and have been rubbished. What we also need to do, and the only reason anybody can make for doing this, is that it was necessary. We need, as a people, to carry out a detailed inquiry to determine, did this lockdown do more harm than good? At a variety of different levels. First of all, we can talk about health. Did it actually do any good for the health of the people? And many people have missed appropriate medical treatment, such as cancer screening, during the process of this lockdown. What are the long-term ramifications of that? What are the long-term ramifications for the economy on which our health service depends? We have spent somewhere between 20 and 30 billion euros, at a conservative estimate, subsidizing the absurd policies which were implemented during the lockdown. This has undoubtedly kicked in to an inflationary pressure. That's already been witnessed. And there are fears that over the next year to 2 years, we may see a return to the type of inflation that we witnessed in the 1970s. And remember, inflation is a serious taxation. It's a taxation against saving. It is a means whereby government grabs your savings, grabs your money, in order to pay for their reckless policies. Another very negative impact has been that of social solidarity. Many people have claimed that the social solidarity we experienced during the lockdown was a good thing. I didn't witness that. I witnessed a lot of people being frightened. I witnessed a lot of people being terrified. I witnessed a lot of people behaving in a grossly discourteous manner to other people. That represents not an improvement, but a breakdown in social solidarity. And we've also got to remember that we impose discriminatory laws against those who disagree with the process of vaccination. We came as close as makes no difference to mandatory vaccination. We didn't quite go that far, because hopefully our constitution would prevent that from happening. But people who refused to agree with the process of having a particular medical procedure injected into them were subject to discrimination at a variety of different levels. Another thing I think we've got to look at is the whole process of government. In our case, government seems to have been devolved to an organization called NPHET, an organization which I have to say was manifestly unsuited to the process of government. No dissenting voices were permitted, and we must also question the role of the Medical Council in that whole area. Is it the case that several doctors who voiced alternative opinions were targeted by the Medical Council, were removed from the Medical Council, and some of them were removed from practice. Is it the case that the Medical Council actively obstructed the provision of treatments which were shown to be effective in other jurisdictions, such as the United States? Did that happen? If that did happen, can we really say that the Medical Council continues to be fit for purpose? Now, I remember some years ago the bishops of Ireland standing outside government buildings with the leaders of the government and apologising to the Irish people for the mistakes that they had made. I think if we look seriously at what the Medical Council has done over the past number of years, it may be necessary for the entire medical profession to stand on government building steps and apologise to the people for what they've done. Because I believe that by allowing themselves to become the tool of government, rather than independent doctors whose first obligation is to do no harm, they have done harm. And I believe they may have damaged the health and possibly caused loss of lives of many of the people of this country. That remains to be determined. And that's why I think we do need a proper, detailed inquiry. Another aspect of the process of devolvement of government, and government ran for cover as soon as this matter took place, they ran for cover. They did not want to take responsibility. They devolved their decision-making process to NIFIT and to other senior academics. Some of those academics came up with some of the most foolish, some of the most ridiculous, and some of the most unjustified proposals I have ever heard. They were unsuited to the purpose of government. The purpose of government is not to simply take advice from scientists or academics. It is to listen to that advice. But the entire process of government must take in far more than a single professional person will be able to incorporate. The process of government must broadly assess the impacts over a wide area of society of any particular policy. That was not done. Government abandoned their responsibilities in that regard. The people that have been wheeled out, and we all know them, now all household names. One of them came out last week. They're still here. They seem to have adopted a role in our society now that when we want leadership, we don't go to government, we don't go to the people we elect, we go to these very questionable academics, people of very questionable moral standing. One of them came out with the suggestion last week that men should be licensed to go into social situations. And we're talking about all men here. How anybody could come up with that kind of fascistic craziness, and how we could have listened to people like that over the last 2 years, it is beyond my understanding. But I'll tell you where I think that fascism comes from. It comes from the fact that over the past 2 years, we have abandoned the process of proper democracy. Perhaps there's one thing we can learn from all this. We should take our academics and our scientists with a large grain of salt, because they have too narrow a focus to be able to determine government policy. Advice, certainly, but no more than advice. And the role of government is to assess advice over a broad range of areas. And we've forgotten that. Now, this is before we even come to the issue of the vaccines. I have heard many anecdotal stories of people who are deeply concerned that, yes, there have been negative impacts of the vaccines. When you read about the manner in which the vaccines were produced, it must be stated that, yes, these are experimental vaccines. We have no idea what the long-term implications will be. We have not put in place any mechanism of assessing adverse effects of the vaccines, this program of mass vaccination. Already we hear warnings from even the European Union that repeated doses of boosters may in the long term affect the immune system of people. Perhaps they're finally beginning to tell us the truth. But these warnings have been made right from the beginning. Very serious and very senior medical people have been warning against the dangers of the mass vaccination program of a very novel type. These are not standard vaccines involving the injection of inert virus material into people. They are deliberately designed to produce a spike protein, which is, of course, a type of poison. The long-term impacts we will not know for some time, but we must put in place a means of assessing negative impacts of vaccines or whether there are increases in diseases and mortality. We in the Irish Freedom Party have carried out some research on that, and we put some information up on our website last week. comparing the all-cause mortality rates between November-December of 2020 and November-December 2021. And they showed an increase in death rates for that 2-month period of 18.6%. Now, that is absolutely colossal. We don't know what the reasons for that are. Government must be aware of it. They must be aware of it. We need to find out what caused that. We will have full detailed statistics from the CSO within 6 months, and we cannot allow that to be forgotten. We must look into that. What is the cause of that spike in deaths, that apparent spike in deaths? There are other areas I want to touch on. The role of the media in engendering fear. Has that not been its primary role over the last 2 years? They didn't ask any hard questions. They didn't ask any hard questions of NPHET. They rarely asked hard questions of government. They didn't ask any hard questions about the manner in which the vaccines were produced. Have they become simply the tool of government, the cheerleaders of government, when it comes to major policy issues such as the pandemic or such as climate change? Do you ever hear a dissenting voice from media on those absolutely crucial issues? I'm afraid you don't. Where have been our courts? For 2 years now, we have undergone a dreadful attack against our Constitution. The Waters and O'Doherty case is finally coming to the Supreme Court. It was given a peremptory hearing in the High Court, and hopefully it will get a proper hearing in the Supreme Court. The Gandhi case was kicked out because of mootness. Now, what was the purpose of bringing that case? It was to determine whether or not government had the right to attack religious freedom in this country, and if they had justified it. That was the purpose of it. When the case finally came to a hearing, after the deliberate delays carried out by government, the court refused to hear it because the relevant legislation had now been repealed. But the purpose of the courts is to bring clarity to the law. If the courts are not prepared to do that, then the courts are not functioning properly and they're not fulfilling their proper constitutional obligation. Look, if we don't have a proper court system which will scrutinize our law and which will hold government to account, if we do not have that, then we do not have a republic. And if the courts are not prepared to carry out their duties, if they're prepared to walk away from them, or if the process isn't working, then we need a serious amendment to our constitution, possibly a new constitution. If the legal profession cannot do their job, we're in big trouble, and it's going to get worse. The Garda Síochána have shown themselves willing to implement draconian restrictions on the freedom of movement of people and the freedom of expression of people in public assembly. That's very worrying when you consider that they have an oath to protect the Constitution and to protect people within the context of the Constitution. If they have shown themselves unwilling to do that, then they have certain questions to answer as well. Look, overall, it's great that this is coming to an end. Hopefully we will get back to normal. Hopefully we will never see this coming back to us again. But we must make sure that it does not happen again. And the only way we will do that is by having a detailed inquiry, warts and all. Everybody who is at fault, everybody who has exaggerated, everybody who has lied to the public must be held to account for doing so. I fear that if we do not have such an inquiry, next up will be the climate lockdown, because you know perfectly well there are so many people who are delighted with the destruction of our economy. They think that it will help our climate in some peculiar way if we are all brought back to the level of the Stone Age and if we're all prevented from having a proper economic activity in our society. We have become addicted to a large extent, and perhaps possibly government has become addicted to creating a climate of fear and crisis. Well, fear is a very negative emotion which will prevent you from taking your full responsibilities as a human being. I hope we all enjoy our freedom while we got it, because I know perfectly well there are many, many people in government and all the major parties of government who are only too willing to take our freedom away from us at any opportunity and under any pretext. Next up, you can be absolutely certain, will be the attacks against freedom of speech. That has been in gestation now for some 2 years. We first made our submission, a very detailed submission to the Oireachtas on that, and it's online, it's available for inspection, it's about 10 pages long, on the importance of free speech and how no republic can function without free speech. And I can assure you, when I see the way our demonstrations are targeted in a very specific way by the radical left, they despise free speech. They want to attack free speech more than anything else. They want to attack free speech almost as much as they want to attack Christianity. We must remember that the purpose of democracy is not democracy itself. The purpose of democracy is the securing of liberty. And if our democratic institutions do not secure liberty for us, well, then they're not functioning very well. This is why I ask you to vote for the Irish Freedom Party. We will place, Liberty will place freedom as an absolute premium. We cannot have economic success without liberty. Any society which is totalitarian, which prevents freedom of speech, will also prevent freedom of business and will also prevent a successful economy from taking place. I would ask you to remember, when we look back on the awful events of the last 2 years, to remember those parties which stood by the Irish people and which demanded an end to the lockdown almost from the beginning, and to vote for the Irish Freedom Party. I'm beginning to think parties like ours are our only hope. The major parties of government have to a man proven that they are not interested in Irish freedom or Irish liberty, and that they will, if necessary, attack our economy and our social solidarity in order to get their way. This has been Michael Leahy of the Irish Freedom Party. Thank you very much.